What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and we're back for another episode of the fighting game tutorial series. Recently in the series we've been going through and cleaning up everything that we have so that we can be ready for online play, tag matches, and AI, because these are three big systems that we're working on, and all of these systems take a lot of work, and it's going to be a lot more rework if we don't do everything right going forward. So throughout the series we've had a lot of different methods, but you'll notice I've cleaned up UI, navigation, and inputs, our different animation systems, camera classes, and a lot more, and we still have more to go. One of the major systems that we have in our game that we haven't modified yet is our character. Thing that I would like to improve about this before going into some of these more advanced episodes is our movement, because we have two forms of movement. We have move right and we have move right controller. Now the whole point of this move right controller system was that move right was for digital inputs such as on and off states, and that's pretty much it. Move right controller was intended to support analog inputs so that we could use joysticks and move these things around on a controller, and it would track how much you're pressing them on or off. And so while the idea was good, we did a lot of copying of logic that really didn't need to be there. In fact, the entire function is pretty much useless at the current state because we haven't added anything. Now you could separate these further if you want to, but really we don't need to. This is just complicating our logic. So we're going to clean up that entire movement system within the character, as well as a couple other things in the character class, such as components that were set up with the template that we don't need. So when we created the character class back in UE4, there were a lot of things in there that were generated for us that we don't necessarily need, we're not going to use, and we haven't used. We can get rid of these things, and there's some more organization we can do on top of that. So this entire episode is dedicated to cleaning up the character, just like we did for a lot of our other classes in our game. So I'm going to call this like massive improvements for our character class or something similar. Now if you want to get caught up in the series before you check out today's episode, you can see how we've done everything from our hitboxes, our initial movement system, our cameras, and a whole lot more. I'll link you to the entire playlist of the fighting game tutorial series right here in the top right corner. You can check it out and get familiar with it. New episodes every Sunday. Alternatively, if you just care about the cleanup, that's perfectly fine. I do recommend you watch some of our earlier cleanup episodes as well, so you're kind of familiar with what we're going to be doing in these episodes, because the logic is already implemented and it works, but we can improve it. As game developers and anyone who's creating a game, you should continue to improve your game or even your software, your product, as you go along. It's very unlikely that it's going to be one and done. You will often have to clean up and modify things later to get everything working well together and in a clean state. At this point, we're ready to get started. This is a code and blueprint tutorial series, but we're really going to be focusing on cleaning up the code portion of the character today. So let's start there. Let's go in the code. One thing I want to start off with in the fighter template character.cpp is our constructor. So in a previous episode, a generic episode, as I like to call it, where it's an episode that works for all my different series, I went over initializer lists. So this constructor may look a little bit different than what you're familiar with. So initializer lists are a little bit faster than setting variables in your constructor body. I have a full explanation and implementation in that episode, so you can see how we've set all this up. If you want to check that episode out, I can link it right here for you, but it's not required that you do that. It's just a little bit faster and typically a little bit cleaner as well. So don't worry if this looks different than what you remember. You don't have to change anything in here to make it work. But if you have changed it, we actually made a mistake in that episode, and we set the gravity counter incorrectly. So we have this variable, default gravity scale, and we set it equal to the character movement's gravity scale by default. This would be fine, except our character movement's gravity scale is set down here, 2.5. And so if we do want to use this method for our gravity, that's perfectly fine, but we'll need to set this variable before setting our default gravity scale. Alternatively, you could default it to 2.5 here instead, but that does make it so if you change the gravity scale on the character movement component, we won't get that change. There's a couple ways you could handle this, but I actually just recommend that if you follow the initializer list episode, all we do for now is set our default gravity scale equal to the get character movement gravity scale. And the reason I recommend this is because we can set it to a default value in the initializer list anyway, and it doesn't hurt anything. So you can keep it here if you want and still set it here, or you can get rid of it altogether right here. We do have two things that count on this. The fast flow scale depends on the default gravity scale. So if you want, you can take both of these out of the initializer list, and we just make sure we set them down below where they are set here. So fast fall scale, and it was default gravity scale times 2. And we can add a comment here. Set default values for variables that depend on component values. So we can set anything that we need down here instead of in the initializer list, and now we have the initializer list still in the series, but all of our logic from previous episodes. So that's super important. Now, one thing I want to do is when I'm in my constructor here, I have some default values that were set when we created the side scroller template initially to make this fighter game. And all this commented out logic that I have here can just be removed. There's no real need to keep it here. First of all, if we ever want to set up our own camera boom and other components in the constructor, we know how to do that. We can just add it back. But having all this commented code in this huge block is ugly, and it's taking up a lot of space that we just don't need to have. So that's the constructor cleaned up. So set up player input component is pretty good. I typically don't have comments above my functions. This is just a preference thing. You don't have to change it if you put yours there. I like to have my header file have the comments about the functions, so I'm just taking that one out. And we don't have to change things like this, but later in the series I started modifying our if statements where if they became too long and they went off the side of the screen, I would enter them down so that they were more easily readable. So I don't have a hard count in my game or anything, but you may want to go through and just modify these things as you see them. So I saw that this if statement had a lot going on. Doing that puts it on the screen so I don't have to scroll over to modify it, which is pretty good. If you want, you can get rid of any temporary or commented out logic. Since I did put these logs in for debugging, I like to keep them, just in case I want to ever uncomment these and test again, which often I actually do. So I'm going to leave them, but if you don't see yourself doing that, feel free to remove them. This is another example right here. It's going off the screen, but adding a simple enter there allows us to see it all in one section without scrolling over. Also makes it easier to edit. Another one here. And here we are, move right. Now this function is huge. It's a real beast. And this is what I was telling you earlier. We have move right and move right controller. But if you are to compare these, and they are very big functions, you're going to figure out they're very much the same. The main difference is this dead zone value that we have where we check to see if the value coming into the function is, say, greater than 0.01, or in the case of move right controller, if it's greater than or equal to 0.20. The other unique part about these functions is we check for if the controller is a gamepad or not. If it's not, then we're using regular move right, and if it is, then we're using move right controller. But we really don't have to check for either of these things. But removing this function is actually quite a bit of work. So while I set out to tackle this in today's episode, we're actually going to knock this out in the next episode about the character cleanup. And that will be the last episode on cleanup for our character class. And after this, we'll go to the animation blueprint, which is the biggest remaining item we have to clean up in our game. After that, we have hitboxes and the game mode. And once those things are done, then we're ready to get into lots of online play, rollback, and AI. Now we have these touch inputs and touch functions as well. These touch functions are literally for touchscreen inputs, which we don't support in the series. You can keep them if you want, if you ever want to include that, or if you do support this. We don't have a real need for it. If we want to add it in the future, that's still something we can do. Our logic in here would be different anyway. We don't want to jump on touch started or stop jumping on touch stopped. So I'd recommend just taking these functions out. Now we have attacks. Hitbox logic. Take damage. Now this one, the parameter list is pretty big because we are passing in all the variables we need without passing in an actual hitbox actor that has all that data. This is something we're very likely going to change in the hitbox cleanup episodes. But for now, something we can do is the same as the other ones. We can actually enter down a line. And you can display it like this if you want. That way it is all in view. hit stop, combo logic, stuns, same as before. We can clean this up a little bit. Input buffer. This one in the input buffer is a little difficult because I intentionally separated them this way because they were equivalent checks. Like this middle one is just checking for statuses. This top one is just checking for types. But we can still do the same process. So I want to separate it like this for my personal understanding. So you could do something like this. This one is a little ugly for me, but I've seen this before where people will have their condition, and if it's an OR condition, it's indented differently than if it's an AND condition. That way you can quickly check which ones are linked together and which ones are not. So feel free to modify that one if you want, but that one is a little bit of a tricky one because of the way I intentionally set it up. Same deal here, and rotate toward opponent 3D. And in tick as well. Now another thing I want to do is go into the fighter template character header file and modify a few things. So if we go up to the top of this, let's make sure everything looks good in here. So we have two actor components that are commented out. These are the ones that we were seeing be set in the constructor, and I have the same excuse for removing them here. We don't need them here. We can always add them back if we do need them. So no reason to leave this here for reference unless you want to. Touch started and touch stopped we also don't need. These are the touch ones that we removed from the CPP file. Might change some of the default comments. And just like we did in take damage in the CPP file, we can separate these a little bit. We can bring them down in the header file as well. So this one is a little bit longer because we have the default values for a lot of these, but something like this should do the trick. This one is really nitpicky, but this comment goes off the screen. We could break this up if we want to. We have a semicolon here, which would be a good place. We could either keep it that way or just add another comment here. 2-line comment is okay. Some people will do a block comment, or we could change the wordiness. Doesn't really matter how we handle this. I'm just going to change the wordiness of it because I didn't really like the description anyway. I feel this one works better. At the very bottom, we also had getters for those components that we removed. We don't need these anymore. Again, we could make getters if we want them, if we need to make new components. So now our fighter template character is so much cleaner than it was, and this is our base character. This is super important, perhaps our most important class that we have. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this helped you clean up your base character class, and if it did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you could do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership, Patreon, and Discord subscribers. You guys are incredible. Thank you for the love and support. I'm so happy you're enjoying the series just like I am. If you ran into any problems while cleaning up your fighter template character or had any questions, feel free to join the Discord community. There is a link in the description, and I would be happy to help you. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.